Good morning and welcome back to I'll Knit If I Want To. Today we're going to have some spin talk at the end as well. I've got some great spinning questions. I actually got a little excited this morning. I'm filming this earlier than usual. I've just had a cup of coffee. I may have poured a second one. And apparently I'm very chatty because I just was going through all the questions like, oh, I'm going to do this one and this one and this one. So we've got like 10 questions, which is double what I usually do. So I hope you have also got something warm and cozy to sip on. Maybe you're knitting or you're spinning. Just trying to find where I put my questions. And let's start with what I'm wearing. Today I am wearing my Ginny cardigan, which I designed in honor of my grandma Ginny, who taught me how to knit. I miss her every day. So it's always a special day when I pull on this sweater. And I'm wearing it with my Sisters United Iced Dyed tank. If you're not familiar with Sisters United, I do hope you'll go check them out. It is a nonprofit that was created by my friend Candace English of the Farmer's Daughter Fibers, and they have some really cool merchandise. They're always doing really amazing things, and all of the profits from those things goes to support their Native communities, including Indigenous women and children, and you should check them out. All right, let's jump in. Oh yes, the yarn for the Ginny cardigan is Harrisville Nightshades. I can't remember the colorway name off the top of my head, but it's the one with the blue. So there we go. Let's answer some questions. Question number one. My question is, why are so many shawl patterns triangular? I would love your opinion on that. I would love to see more rectangular shawl patterns for a change in ways to wear them. Thank you. So as I'm now reading this for the second time, I realized maybe I should have researched the answer. Oops. But I'm just gonna, I guess, give my opinion and no accurate history or facts as to why they are triangular. People have been knitting triangular shawls for a very, very long time. Also square shawls and circular shawls that were knit from the center out. And then those square shawls were often still worn as a triangle, folded in half. But I think that today, why so many people knit triangular shawls, one, I think it's the default shape that people kind of think of when they think of a shawl. So there's that. But two, because it's fun. The shaping in a triangular shawl just tends to be really fun. You know, you start off with this tiny little bit of fabric and it grows rapidly until you get to those end rows. So I think it's really satisfying. So yeah, I just think it's fun to do. As far as rectangular shawls, one of my first patterns, I did a collection. I think I had released maybe 2 patterns, and then I did a little collection of 3 patterns that was called the Staghorn Collective. That was cabled, and there was like a hat, a scarf, and a stole, which would be a rectangular shawl. And that was super fun to knit. I also have the everyday and every way shawls, so those are all rectangular. I will say a lot of people, when they learn how to knit, they start with a scarf. And a lot of people don't ever finish that scarf. Sometimes if they continue to knit, they hop onto other projects. But I think it can be a little bit boring for some knitters, certainly not for all. As I've said, I have multiple rectangular shawl patterns. But I think the shaping that happens in triangles or crescents keeps things really fun. And it keeps your mind a little more engaged than doing a straight rectangle. That being said, there are plenty of ways to make rectangles very fun to knit using stitch patterns, cables, color work, all that kind of fun stuff. And some of us do just enjoy knitting squares and rectangles. You know, my grandma pretty much only ever knit Afghans. So, but yeah, there's actually quite a few rectangle shawl patterns out there. Off the top of my head, Joji Locatelli has some amazing rectangular ones that again have really interesting like construction and colors going on. She did a mystery knit along shawl a few years ago now. But go check hers out because that might be exactly what you're looking for. or you can go check out some of my earlier ones that I have as well. All right. I could use some tips for the blocking process, which I find so frustrating. I feel like I never know when to stop fussing with my knits and trying to get them perfect. For example, I recently finished a nurtured sweater. I used a superwash yarn, so I felt extra paranoid about stretching it too much. The textured pattern is beautiful, but when lying it out on my blocking mats, I felt the slip stitches weren't all bending in the same direction anymore. The more I worked on it, the more panicked I felt. It's drying downstairs as I type, and I'm almost afraid to look at it because I might have liked it better before blocking. Can knits be reblocked? Can I put a superwash knit into the dryer on low to fluff it up after it is dry or mostly dry? I've heard you say that blocking can sometimes fix imperfections that occur during knitting, but most of the time, all I see when blocking is new imperfections. Any advice on blocking for perfectionists would be so appreciated. So I loved this question because I actually can relate to it, even though I very much chat about the magic of blocking and how it can really fix things and not to judge a knit until you've blocked it. I also understand kind of the stress of blocking, especially I think, at least for me, where some of that comes from is if I have a little voice in my head as I'm knitting something that kind of says like, oh, I don't know, this might be too big. Did I knit this too long? Like if there's any of those concerns, I then go into blocking a little more concerned that, you know, for those like, oh, is this going to stretch out? It's perfect right now. Once I block it, will it be too big? So I completely understand blocking anxiety. So as far as tips go, one, I guess I have a few. When it comes to sweaters, I don't do much. I can see this. I always wiggle my desk. I gotta like keep my hands away from my desk. I think that my phone kind of fixes some of the shaky cam, but I'm not trying to Blair Witch Project anyone. Complete side note, I went to Blair Witch Project in the theaters so long ago. I was 16? I must have been. And I got motion sick. I have really bad motion sickness, and that movie made me so sick. Anyways, I'm going to try not to do that to you. So back to blocking. When it comes to sweaters, I try not to overthink it. Like I just lay them flat to dry. I'm actually going to grab something to show you what I like to use. So I actually just blocked my weekender the other day. And this is what I like to block my sweaters on. It is from Coco Knits. I'm already realizing I need to be taking notes. So what else? Oh, I told you about Sisters United. Don't want to forget to link to that. Okay. And I will see if I can find a link for this blocking contraption. Okay. It reminds me of a big old Pringle. It has, my husband's calling. He's just not going to get to talk to me right now. It kind of looks like a Pringle shape. Can you see that? But what I love about this is when it's laying on the floor, airflow can go all around your knit, which makes it dry faster, which was not something you were asking about, but I think it's helpful. But all I do is lay my sweater on there in a generally nice shape. And if you think about once you wear them, try not to think too much about how those wet stitches look, because they do look like a little sad sometimes. But then as they dry, they do fluff up. So don't judge it until it's dry. And remember, you're the only one that's going to notice any of these things. Nobody else is going to look at your sweater and be like, those stitches look a wee bit crooked. If they do, you need to tell them to back up because they're too close to you. I know that doesn't always make us feel better though when our eye is still scrutinizing it. But what I would recommend is leaving it alone, let it dry completely, and just put it on and wear it. Because also when you're wearing it, things tend to zhuzh into place just from wearing. I mean, I tend to like my sweaters even better after like a couple months of wearing, because I feel like at that point I've blocked it a few times, it's kind of molded to my body, and it's really settled into yourself. So try not to judge things too harshly right away. But when it comes to something like sweaters, I really do just lay it flat on my little Pringle here and I forget about it. The only time I'm using blocking wires and a lot of pins is generally with shawls or lace that I really want it to open up a certain way. I very rarely use any pins on sweaters, especially after the first blocking. The first blocking, I might, or if I have to do any seaming or picking up of stitches, I might use some pins there just so I can get my edges really flat so that it's easier to do the seaming or picking up of stitches after the fact. Now, you had mentioned being nervous, like, oh, you've used a superwash yarn, you really liked it pre-blocking, you're worried about it stretching out. There is, a lot of times we talk about blocking and we talk, oh, I can't show this yet, that's a new pattern. I'm just gonna grab this old guy here. So we talk about stretching and pinning and using blocking wires and things like that. But I think we don't talk as much about the fact that you can kind of smush things into the desired size you want it as well. And it's amazing how, yes, absolutely, when you pull that knit out of the water, especially if it's waterlogged, it can stretch, and it might stretch more than you want it to. But what I do in that case is once I have my knit onto my blocking mats or whatever you're blocking on, I will literally like smush and mold it to get it into the general size and shape I would like it to be. So let's say this had kind of stretched out funny. I use like a smush and kind of pat. So I just like smush it into where I want it, and then I just pat, 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 pat to smooth it out. And it's amazing how, sorry, that's, my husband's talking to me. We have work getting done on our house. I'll talk to him later. So again, the smush and pat, and it's amazing how much that can kind of get things into the shape you want it. And I think it's especially useful for if you're doing superwash. Like, you know, we've talked about how when you've knit a sweater in superwash yarn, the hem can kind of blow out, like the ribbing can maybe open up more than you want. That is a perfect time where I might like smush it into where I want it, and then I would pat, 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 pat. And then just leave it. Like, trust that like as it dries, it will kind of fluff up and look better. So there's my blocking tips. The more you do it, the better you're going to feel about it. And at the end of the day, I think it's really easy to overthink the blocking when once you're wearing that shawl or sweater or whatever it is, it doesn't end up being that big of a deal. So, you know, if it's really getting to you, I would almost say less is more. I would block, I would go lay it out, I'd give it a quick pat, and I would just walk away instead of like hyper focusing and over zhuzhing it. So there you go. I hope that helps. I know, unfortunately, like sometimes we just feel the way we feel, and we cannot take those feelings away by that kind of advice. But I hope that helps. And yes, knits can be reblocked 100%. You can throw it back into a tub, but if it's still damp, you don't need to do that. Just zhuzh it some more. But as far as your nurtured goes, I think it's going to work great. I wouldn't worry about it. If you feel like any area is stretched out, remember you can go to the last page of your pattern. There's a schematic, or second to last page, and you can look at some of those measurements, and you can even measure and just make sure it's the measurements that you were intending. And that's where that push, that smush and pat might come in handy. And then just leave it. Just trust it. It'll be great. Okay. Question number 3. I am knitting the throwback and have just gotten past blocking the body before starting on the band. When I blocked the body, it stretched considerably lengthwise, and I like it at the length that it is now. How do I adjust the length of the band? Also, since the band won't have been blocked, will this affect the finished product down the line? So with something like the throwback, the reason that we block the body before the button band is because if you don't, the edge of your cardigan is rolling, and it's not very fun to pick up stitches into that. It can be kind of annoying. So when we have blocked the cardigan, that edge is all nice and straight. It's a lot easier to see what we're doing and to pick up those stitches. Now, my question to you would be, how much longer is the sweater? You said it grew considerably. Is it much longer than what the pattern calls for? If it's still the measurement the pattern calls for, you would just pick up the amount of stitches called for in the pattern. If it is longer, you'll just pick up some extra stitches. The good thing is, I mean, I'm trying to remember the throwback band. There's no buttons, so you don't have to worry about spacing out new buttonholes or anything like that. I'm trying to remember if it's a 4x4 ribbing. It's either 4x4 or 2x2. I think it's 4x4. So ideally you would want to add like 8 more stitches or 16 more stitches to that button band just to keep in pattern. But to be honest, even if you had like a half rib at the top and bottom, which I think it might already in that pattern, like no one's gonna notice. So I would just pick up stitches to make up for that length. And you're going to reblock after you have done the band. I keep calling it the button band, but there's no buttons. So you're going to reblock the sweater after that, and no, it shouldn't affect anything. So yeah, that's it. Just pick up a few extra stitches and you'll be good to go. And don't be afraid to do that. You know, again, we can kind of make it look nice. You'll just want to determine if you want to have those, like how you want them to line up with the rest of your ribbing. All right. This is just a curious kind of question. You seem to have very little time for personal knitting. I was wondering, how do you avoid the siren call of patterns from other designers? If you fall in love with a pattern, are you tempted to carve out some time for it? I'm only a knitter and not a designer, and I'm free to try patterns from all sorts of designers all over the world. It seems your endless curiosity would be drawn to that as well, despite your crazy busy design schedule. So when I first started designing, I very much thought that I would continue to knit other people's patterns. My goal was just to have like one of my own designs on the needles like at all times, but to also just continue knitting the way I always had. And it just ended up being a really natural evolution that I think once your brain goes down that designer road, it's hard to go back. So the last time I tried to knit somebody else's pattern was probably 4 years ago. And it was around Christmas time, and I was like, you know, I'm going to gift myself some like selfish knitting time, and I'm going to knit this cardigan. And I got about halfway through and realized like, I'm never going to finish this. My brain really finds joy in figuring out designs and trying things out. I also have so many ideas that I already don't have enough time to knit my own ideas, much less somebody else's. So yeah, I don't knit other people's designs anymore. I think there are so many amazing designers out there who are doing really, really cool things that are very different from my own work. But generally speaking, if I do have any selfish knitting time, I re-knit. I have a lot of multiples of my own patterns. A lot of times what happens is when I'm designing something, I then get really, really curious about what it will look like in different colors, or as a cardigan, if it's a pullover, or as a pullover, if it's a cardigan, or like, you know, things like that, where I want to continue to play with what I'm working on. So that's where my curiosity tends to go. And then for my super selfish knitting, I pretty much just knit my DRK everyday socks again and again and again, because that's like my mindless, I haven't memorized, and it just feels really good to knit it. I will also say my curiosity, I think, gets used up by other crafts such as spinning and sewing. So if I do have some free time, that's what I'd rather spend my time on. One of my favorite things ever is to be able to sew articles of clothing that I really like to wear with my knits. And those are like my favorite days when I'm wearing a totally handmade outfit. It just feels like my most me self when on those days. So I love to do that. And because I don't really have any free time, if I can squeak a little in, I'm going to be doing that, or I'm going to spin yarn. Spinning yarn is just like my obsession. So that's kind of where my curiosity goes. All right. So talk a little bit about choosing a wool for warmth. I've knit 5 sweaters this season, and all but 4 of them are wildly comfortable. So they've tried out a lot of different yarns, feeling warm but not overheated. Then they tried another yarn that made them feel very hot. It's merino, so I thought it would figured it would work similarly warmth wise. I've always thought of wool as both insulating and cooling. So my question is, how do you know in advance how warm a wool will be? Is it the brand, the type of sheep, or my gauge? All of the above, although I would switch out brand for spin. So is it woolen or worsted spun, the breed of sheep, and your gauge. So generally speaking, when I think of knitting for warmth, I start with the spin. Woolen spun yarns are going to be warmer because they're more insulating. And so because they have air trapped in the core of that yarn, your body heat warms up that air and makes it really, really insulating. Whereas a worsted spun is spun pushing out all that air, so they're not as warm. And I hadn't thought about that too heavily until I knit my husband a couple sweaters, and one was with woolen spun and one was not. And it was so interesting, his reaction to wearing those sweaters, where he loved that woolen spun sweater. I mean, he literally, it fell apart. He would sleep in it sometimes. Like, he wore it so much that it disintegrated, which was a gauge issue. I'll circle back to that. But then his worsted spun sweater, he doesn't wear as much because it's not as warm, and he wears them mostly in like the very, very cold part of winter here. So I would say woolen spun is the warmest. I actually had a commenter, I think on sometime in the last couple of videos, who was saying how with the cooling thing, again, a woolen spun yarn can kind of trap cool air. I haven't necessarily found that, because if it's on your body, you're still heating up that air. I'll have to ponder that one a little bit more. But, and then I can't really speak much on sheep breeds, as far as one offering more warmth than the other, but I'd be curious to learn more about that. And I think going beyond sheep and thinking about just different yarn content in general. So linen, flax, cotton, silk are going to have very different properties on our body than wool, yak, etc. That is where I would suggest Clara Parks' Knitter's Book of Yarn, which I've suggested a whole bunch of times. And then also, I just need to bring it up here. I always look for it when I'm doing these, but it is, I'm going to completely forget the name. It's a whole book on spinning. Oh, fleece and fiber source book. Yeah, something like that. I might have flipped the 2 first words. Fiber, fleece and fiber, something like that, source book. That's the one I'm thinking of, which I also think would be a wealth of knowledge. So that's what I would do. And your gauge. So the tighter the gauge, the more hard wearing generally your knit's gonna be, and it's gonna let less air come through. So that would also affect how warm something is. But it would be really neat. I don't know if you keep a knitting journal, but I would recommend putting some notes in there as you have finished these garments. Like you have these 5 sweaters already, putting notes of this was really comfortable, this I found too warm. And if you include the fiber content and this, as much as you can figure out about the structure of that yarn, whether it's woolen or worsted spun, it would be really interesting to have those notes in your knitting journal. So as you're making decisions in the future, you can apply some of that knowledge to future knits. All right, so now we're gonna get into a little bit of spinning chat. I am going to preface this by saying I am in no way a spinning teacher. I have been spinning for about 2 years. I can spin a knittable yarn, but I still consider myself a novice. I feel like I have not even cracked the surface of all there is to know about spinning. It's something that I want to continue to improve on. I am so fascinated by it. You know, I see the master spinners out there and I'm just like, how'd you do it? So all that I'm going to answer right now is 100% my own faulty opinions and experiences. So just let's move forward with that caveat. All right, I'm a newish spinner and I'm envious of you being able to spin fingering sport weight so easily, especially since fingering is my weight of choice. How do you get your single so thin so you can ply it to be fingering or sport weight? Do you pre-draft? Are there any tips you can give to be able to spin such fine yarn? Can you show how thin your singles are in order to 2-ply or 3-ply to be a fingering weight? So I did grab one of my little control cards. So when we just did the DRK spin it to knit along for the DRK everyday socks, I made a little control card. So this is my ply back, and then that was the width of my singles, and then I plied those 3 together to get my fingering weight yarn. I will say I think that for me, spinning fine just comes a little more intuitively than spinning thick. I've actually been practicing trying to spin thicker. Here's some more of my control cards. So you could see I was kind of trying, that just fell off of my control card. There you go, now you can kind of see it if I pull it back. So from the time I started spinning, as I have talked about, somebody actually brings up in a later question, how I kind of strangled the life out of my first skein. That seems to be what I default to. So part of that is just intuition. It's just kind of how I do it. But tips as to spinning finer, and please, if you are a spinner, feel free to throw in your tips below. But you need to make sure you have more twist. So when you spin thicker, you can do a little bit of less twist. And the finer you go, the more twist you need for that fiber to hold together. So that would be one thing, is making sure that you are using, that you're either treadling fast enough or using a whirl that is small enough to give you more of that twist. Pre-drafting, the only time I pre-draft is if I'm using a fiber that is giving me some trouble, that's a little too sticky, so that it's messing me up as I'm trying to draft, and maybe then I get like a thick bit, thin bit, thick bit, because it's kind of coming out in chunks. Like sometimes certain fiber, especially after it's been dyed, if I'm using like a braid, there will sometimes be like where there was more, wow, I forgot the word for dye for a minute there. Just whoop. So where there was like maybe a little bit more dye, a little more color there, and sometimes that can kind of cause the fiber to compact. If it was a compacted fiber, maybe it was a braid sitting in my stash for too long, and those fibers kind of squish together. Depending on where you buy fiber from, sometimes it just comes like this, where it's not in a braid at all. I actually kind of prefer this because sometimes I've gotten fiber, I recently spun up a braid that it's so beautiful the way that this fiber comes, but it is so tightly, they do like a crochet braid to package the fiber, and it was the same amount as this. It was 4 ounces, but it was in a braid like this big because it was so compacted, and I had to pre-draft that fiber because it was just like stuck together. Also, so right now I am working on spinning up, I'm doing a 3-ply, which actually is using this this fiber, which I have not started yet. This is Beastly Behavior from Hello Yarn, which is, I love her fiber club. I love all of her fiber. So it's this and then one of her other fiber clubs. So I'm going to do 1 ply of each and then ply them together. But for the bat, which is from Artifacts of Appreciation, I do like to pre-draft this a little bit because there's a lot of different fibers in here, including some sari silk. So I find that when I attenuate or stretch it out a little bit, I can get a smoother ply. Yes. Just all go smoother. So outside of that, I would just say practicing. Just like I'm trying to practice spinning thick. But yeah, and I try to, if you want a more exact than just looking at my control card, as far as spinning for a fingering weight yarn, depending on how many plies you're going for. Just grabbing my little, you can use like one of these. So this is a reps per inch tool, but it also has a yarn gauge on it. So if I am going to be doing a fingering weight yarn, I definitely don't want my singles. If I was doing a 2-ply, I'd want my singles about that bottom thickness. For a 3-ply, I go a little finer. I wish I had better advice, because I really do, for me, it's just very much by feel. So I guess that's where it comes down to like the just practicing and just seeing how fine you can go, you know. The good news is if you go super fine, you can always add more plies to get it to the final thickness you want in that final yarn. But depends on how, you know, that's obviously a little more work too, spinning all those extra plies. Okay, I would like to ask about letting the spun yarn to rest. So they want to ask about letting your singles rest before plying them. I've been told that the singles yarn should be plied quickly, like in days, not weeks, so the yarn doesn't settle and relax into the twist. I'm a beginner and do not have experience to determine if that has happened or not. I might not be able to spin all my bobbins at once and ply them. It might even take weeks. Is this a real problem, or does it affect only my ply back sample? How about the already plied yarn? Okay, so as far as the plied yarn, do you let it rest on the bobbin before adding it to the niddy noddy before washing? So let's start with that ply back sample. Ply back samples, you don't want that to come from rested yarn at all. You want to do a ply back sample right after spinning, because you want that twist energy to be there so you have an accurate idea of how much twist energy is in there. As your singles rest, that twist energy calms down. And so it won't give you a true idea of how much twist is in there. So that would be when, yeah, you wouldn't want to go up to a bobbin that you've had resting and try and take a ply back sample on it, because that's just not going to give you accurate information. Now, as far as letting your singles rest, I do let my singles rest. For one, like right now I've been so busy with work that I've only gotten to spin a few minutes each week. There's just no way I'm going to finish that spin very quickly. So, you know, they're going to rest. I'm also doing 3 different plies. So I think the advice I have received is that what you don't want to do is have a rested bobbin and ply it with an unrested bobbin, because that means one of your singles is going to have way more twist energy in it than your other one, and it's going to be really hard to ply that evenly. Jillian Moreno does a great job of covering this in her Craftsy class about plying, so you might want to check that out. I will also add that. Don't you just love being here with me in real time? Oh, if only I edited things. Okay. So that's all that all that I do is, again, I also have like multiple different spinning projects going on right now. So you just want to make sure that you allow all of the plies to rest, all of the singles to rest before applying them, would be my advice. I do not rest my plied yarn before washing it. I pretty much, unless, you know, there are times when I might finish plying it at night and then I go to bed and then I'm like, okay, I'll deal with this in the morning. And then I put it on my niddy noddy and wash it. But otherwise, I'm usually too excited and I just do it right away. I would be curious if anyone has any thoughts on that, if you should let the yarn rest on before washing it, but I guess I don't see why, because as soon as you wash it, it's going to activate the old twist from the singles, and my stomach just growled. Hopefully you can't hear that. Okay, let's go on. But yes, I like to rest my singles and then I apply them together. I love the look of your hand spun attuned shawl, and I know you've shared bits and pieces of how you spun it across a few videos. I am hoping to spin for my own soon and was wondering if you could share your whole process. So I have, if you want to see any photos of that spin, you can go back into my Instagram. I should actually go back and tag those with the attuned shawl so they're a little easier to find. I'm going to do that so that you guys, so I will, if you're on Instagram, I'll add the attuned shawl hashtag to those old spinning photos so that you can kind of find them easier. But basically what I did is I went and I grabbed I had an entire, like, the Hedgehog Fiber Club's 3 months. So I had an entire 3 months worth of fiber that I hadn't gotten into at all yet. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to spin this fiber. This beautiful fiber is just sitting here. So I pulled it all out. And what I noticed was that it was very blue and pink dominant. So I decided to separate the blues and the pinks. So I basically dumped out all the fiber, and I even went through and pulled apart, you know, it kind of comes like this. And so I actually, like, I would remove the blue fiber, and then I would put, let's say pretend this was pink, and I would remove the pink fiber, and I just separated it into piles. And then what I did from there is I stripped it down into like these little nestlets. So kind of like these, but even smaller. And I just filled out, I have an apple picking basket from when we went apple picking a couple of years ago. And I just filled that up with little nestlets, and I just grabbed and spun. So it really was not organized. I would kind of pick as I was spinning. I'd be like, ooh, I have this, you know, there's a little bit of green here, and I can see this little nestlet has a little green hanging out at the end, and so I'm gonna grab that one next. So I would kind of do it like that, but honestly, it was pretty willy-nilly. And I ended up with 3 full bobbins of the blue dominant, 3 very full bobbins of the pink dominant. And so what I did is, for my first DRK everyday sweater that's out of my hand spun, I've worn it on here multiple times, I had plied together a pink and a blue. And then I was like, you know, I really want to see what it would look like if I just kept the pinks together and kept the blues together. So then from there, I plied together the pinks, and that is this. This is my leftover from the attuned shawl. And then I did the remaining blues together, and I have that skein here. So this is my last unused skein from, and it's so heavy. I mean, this is so much yarn. I've twisted it up fairly tight, so you can't really tell, but this is like 7 ounces. It's really heavy. So that's the blues all by themselves. So I just really wanted to do, it was just an experiment. I just wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to see if I would like it. I was kind of playing with fading the way I do with my knits, but I was doing it with my spinning. So I would kind of move from like the lighter pink dominance to the darker and back again, but it was all very fluid. I wasn't trying to over control it. The question is, what do I do with this last skein? So there you go. That was basically my plan, was I just played. And then the neutral color for that first, for the hand spun version, is just 2 Cormo plied together. One was a natural undyed beige and one was white, and I just plied them together. This was actually a really challenging spin. The fiber, I realized later on, was full of second cuts. So it wasn't that delightful to spin. The company's no longer around either. So that is why I have not shared any of their information, because you can't get their fiber anymore. But it worked out really beautifully once it was spun and in the shawl. So I am happy I stuck with it. I still have some of this fiber left unspun that I think I'm going to make bats out of. So there we go. All right, one more sip of coffee. We still have 2 questions left. How long is this getting? Yeah, it's getting a little long. Okay, I have a spinning wheel, but I'm having trouble with keeping the drafting going without it always breaking. I get so frustrated that I give up. Is there any chance you could do a video on just demonstrating spinning? I have all this fiber just wanting to spin up. So I am not going to do a video I might show someday me just spinning for the fun of it, but I won't do any tutorials on spinning because I just don't feel like that's my place to do that because I don't know what I'm doing. So I would not want a chance misguiding somebody. And you know, people on the internet aren't always nice. So I guess I don't want to open myself up to that criticism of them being like, you're not actually doing it right. So unfortunately, I'm not going to do any tutorials on spinning, but I had the same problem and it was so frustrating. So I 100% understand what you're feeling right now, because that is what I would be going pretty good, but then my fiber would break. Like all of a sudden it would just come back out of my wheel because there wasn't enough twist in it. So that's the problem. You need more twist. And I didn't understand that that was the problem. So I dealt with that issue for like months. Sometimes it would be great, and then all of a sudden it would just keep breaking on me, and I would try and reattach my fiber, and it was so frustrating. So you need more twist, which means you either need to treadle faster to build up that twist, or you can also turn down your brake. Your brake might be pulling your fiber in depending on how you're tensioning. I pretty much only use Scotch tension. So I adjust my brake, which determines, there's fiber flying around me, which determines how fast that fiber is gonna go into my wheel from my hands. If you have that up too high, which was one of my problems, it will take that fiber out of your hands before there's been enough twist put into it, and then it's gonna fall apart. So basically you need to add more twist either by treadling or using a smaller whirl, or turn down that brake so that you can treadle long enough that the twist is built up for it to feed onto your wheel without breaking. I don't know how I just got fiber like stuck in my lip gloss. It's just always around me. So I hope that helps, because I wish I could have figured that out earlier, because I definitely feel your pain. So yeah, get some more twist. All right, one last spinning question to round out the day. I was recently gifted my Grammy's spinning wheel, and I'm learning to spin. That's so sweet. You said in another episode that you used to spin too tightly and strangle the life out of your yarn. I told you this would come up again. When you were first starting. I think I'm doing the same thing. I was wondering if you had any tips for how to stop doing that. Also, what did you do with your wonky hand spun when you first started? Mine is very questionable at the moment. It knits up very lumpy and full of holes. So, I'm going to answer this in backwards order. For my for my early hand spun, I knit my nurtured sweater because I feel like the texture worked really well with uneven hand spun yarn. So that is what I did. So I ended up overcorrecting before I settled in the middle, and that might be your journey as well, where that first skein, it's just so overspun. And I think it was during the plying that I overplied the life out of it. So then I was so nervous for plying that I cranked up my brake so that it would whip that yarn out of my hand before there was too much twist. So then I had a number of underplied skeins. And then I kind of was able to finally learn enough about my wheel and making adjustments to my wheel to start compensating and learning more about the twist. So to be honest, I think it's just kind of practice and making those little adjustments until you find your sweet spot, which is challenging because for me, it's like I never knew if the adjustments I was making were going to do what I wanted them to do. I think that would be a reason why it would probably be very lovely to find like a spinning guild or spinning group where you can have people who are further along than you who can actually look at the yarn and go, oh, this is the problem, and like help you diagnose that. I did not have that early on, so it was really just trial and error. And I spun up a lot of yarn. I still have some of those early skeins that I haven't knit with yet. I think that they are great for things like color work because you're not going to really notice the unevenness in them as much. They could be great for a little dog sweater if you've got any pets. Even little kid sweaters. I think they're great for shawls because I think shawls are elevated by texture. So if you have a little thick and thin happening, I think that's okay. Weaving would be another great thing to use with those early skeins. But my very first skein that I strangled the life out of, I just have it, you know, it's just a keepsake. I don't know what I could get out of it. I mean, it is like, people could use it as a fishing net. Like they could hoist sails with it. It's so twisted. It's like rock hard. It's like chainmail. That's what it's like. But yeah, just keep going. It does get easier, and the further along you get, you'll be able to start visually understanding what's happening. Again, I highly recommend Jillian Moreno's Applying Class on Craftsy. I really loved Woolen to Worsted. Oh, what's her name? Oh, I don't like when I forget a name. She's, you know, the creator of Fly Magazine. I actually started keeping like a list of classes and things, spinning resources. Okay, let's see. Yes, Drafting from Worsted to Woolen by J.C. Faulkner. Those were really great classes. Alana Wilcox has a ton of classes online. She's Spinny Buns on Instagram. And I actually just joined the Sheep Spotter Society, and I am going to try that out this year to see where that gets me with my spinning. I also love all of the School of Sweet Georgia spinning classes. So if you have the means and the time to do some of those classes, even online, even better if you have a local place you could go take classes, I do recommend that because I think that's when you're going to end up getting those little tidbits that can be like the answer to whatever is going on with your spinning. So, okay, I just talked for so long, so I am going to end this here, but I am still figuring out the next spin it to knit it, knit along. I'll share more about that as I get it figured out. So yeah, in the meantime, I would love to see you over in our DRK March to May knit along. We're doing both sweaters and shawls. You're more than welcome to join in with the new Attune shawl. And I will see you hopefully next week. Same place, same-ish time, hopefully. And I hope you have a great day, a great weekend. I hope you get to make some things, bake some things, sip some things. Yeah, just have a great weekend. Thank you.